this doggone thing, Trump. Friday, Microsoft said the Iranians would try to meddle in the election. Saturday, your campaign computers got hacked, you say, by the Iranians, you say, and you hadn't reported it to the FBI, you say, even though it's by Iran and part of the whole campaign scam from Trump headquarters. Trump is that Iran is the root of all evil, and you didn't report it to the FBI, and you didn't provide any evidence that it actually happened? A 271-page Trump privileged and confidential document gets sent to the Washington Post from an AOL user named Robert. Do you call Homeland Security, Trump? You do not. And then Politico says it's been getting documents, including a long vetting report on J.V. Vance from Robert since the 22nd of July. Called the DOJ then? Nope. You just announced it. We've been hacked by the Iranians. Iranians named Robert. Monday, the FBI, again, anonymously, not even a spokesman's name attached to this, just like that, no, he was too hit by a bullet announcement by the FBI. The FBI gives a clear and compelling picture of the vast team that has fanned out across our country, across the internet, across the world to track down this evil. Quote, we can confirm the FBI is investigating this matter. Is that it? Is anything printed on the back, maybe, on the statement? We can confirm the FBI is investigating. Investigating who? Investigating what? Investigating whether they were really hacked? Whether they were really hacked by Iranians? Whether Trump just made it all up? Whether the Trump campaign fell for some sort of phishing op at a porn site? Can you be a little more specific? Or just specific at all? No, all the doctors know he got shot by a bullet. Oh, none of them will be quoted on the record, and we don't have any medical records or anything from the hospital, but yeah, they trust us. We've never lied. But now, of course, Trump says, I was hacked by Iran. And the FBI says it's investigating, like I'm investigating buying Warner Bros. Discovery for $100 cash. Because Trump's campaign claims this, that means that you, Washington Post, and you, Politico, you can't print any of it because it's all part of an internal attempt to interfere with the election by a foreign agent, and the American media can't participate in anything like that. This time, anyway. Oh, bullshit. Publish all of it. You have some proof, Trump? I should ask the Trump campaign. Trump no longer knows where he is, let alone what's happening to his campaign. You have some proof, Trump campaign? Let's see it. Anything. Any proof. Otherwise, to not publish whatever the Trumpists are so worried about, that they've made up this story about how the Iranians are better at computers than they, the Trumpists, are. Any decision to not publish this is campaign interference. Yeah, the Iranians did it. And they sent it to the Post and Politico via AOL. But American journalism, let's let Trump set the rules here without evidence, because why would people like Roger turn in the barrel, I love WikiLeaks, oh no, I've been hacked, Stone, and Chris Swiftboat Jr. La Savita, and Susie Wiles, and Don the Basket Case Trump, and Stephen Chung try to manipulate the major media outlets? Again. Stephen Chung, October 17, 2016. Quote, must-watch leaked emails from WikiLeaks show what Hillary Clinton's staff and allies really think, and there's a link to YouTube. Washington Post? Politico? America? You're getting played by the Trump campaign like Toby Ziegler's $2 banjo. Again. Besides which, maybe the most salient hole in the logic here that any part of this Trump story is true, you're Robert from Iran. and you want to hurt Trump by hacking his computers and sending all his stuff to news organizations that so clearly oppose him. So you sent it to the Washington Post and Politico. Have you read the Washington Post and Politico lately? I mean, why not just send it to the New York Times while you're at it? Dear Joe Kahn, this will really hurt Trump. Wait. What? Why? What? Because they're still mad Biden wouldn't drop out when they told him to? The lead story in Politico's PM newsletter yesterday was 8 gullible paragraphs about Trump returning to Twitter and doing this crap with Musk, because there are not enough crazy white supremacists on Twitter X right now. The lead story in Politico's morning newsletter had been about the lack of a comprehensive Kamala Harris policy book after 23 days of her campaign. I mean, the nerve of the woman! Not Trump's insane AI charges against the vice president and the unexpected damage he did to himself with that, or why that resonated the way it did. Not the fact that he was only off on his Willie Brown story by 28 years, 3,000 miles, 2 cities, and 7 inches in height. Not that his polling is cratering. Politico's lead was Trump returning to Twitter X with tweets he clearly didn't write. Yeah, boy, I'm telling you, that's who I'd call Politico. This is a well-coordinated campaign to damage Trump. And oh, by the way, Trump's polling is cratering. The polls continue to be Kamala-palooza. The most startling of them has gotten the least attention. The New York Times buried this in one of its buried stories on the buried Trump buried crisis, buried it in paragraph 40. 40 internal polls from Ohio. Quote, for those 3 of you still reading down here in paragraph 40, way down here, we're down here, the most important part of the story. We're down here in paragraph 40. 2 private polls conducted in Ohio recently by Republican pollsters, which Mr. Trump carried in 2020 with 53% of the vote, showed him receiving less than 50% of the vote against Ms. Harris in the state, according to a person with direct knowledge of the data. First off, that's probably Kellyanne Conway. But what's the difference? Note, it does not say Trump is losing to Harris. Hell, it is only the start of week 4 of her campaign. And there is a Trump honeymoon there, given that Ohioans are still rejoicing because if he wins, he would take this weirdo Senator J.V. Vance off their hands. But if Trump is in trouble in Ohio, find a spot on the golf course because his 2024 campaign is already dying. And that's just the start. She is now more trusted than Trump on the economy. All the less big-name polls ask questions like this, but now we're getting the marquee polls. This one about the economy is from the Financial Times. She's favored 42-41 in polling done by the University of Michigan School of Business. And the last time they asked anybody, Trump was favored over Biden on the economy, 41-35. She made up a 7-point swing on the economy in 3 weeks. On the economy. Oh, he's going to be on Twitter tonight. Let's do a story about we're political. CNBC did a poll with a group called Generation Lab, surveying only voters under the age of 35. They believe she is a better choice on the economy, also by a point. The kiddos also believe she is their pick for the presidency by 12 points. She's 46-34 ahead, voters under the age of 35. We saw Harris leapfrog Trump in the Rust Belt last week. Now we are seeing it in polling that did not close until Sunday. Bullfinch Group, for a site supposedly servicing independent voters. Harris by 4 in Pennsylvania, by 5 in Michigan, by 9 in Wisconsin. And the pollsters claim their respondents rate themselves, on average, independent with a marginal lean towards the right. This is after the New York Times Siena College poll that closed last Friday. Michigan, Harris 50, Trump 46. Pennsylvania, Harris 50, Trump 46. Wisconsin, Harris 50, Trump 46. I'm beginning to sense a pattern. Insider Advantage, a polling group that often works for the GOP and the Trump campaign, also did a Michigan poll. Harris 49, Trump 47 as of Thursday. A Republican pollster. Another Republican pollster, Decipher AI, did its own poll. No Republican money involved in this one in Nevada. And if they try to sell it to Republicans, they're not going to get any of their money this time either. Harris 49.2, Trump 43.6. That's nearly 6 points. It is 3 times the lead in Nevada that was seen when she took over the nomination. YouGov, North Carolina. Results are from polling ending Friday. Harris 46, Trump 46. A tie in North Carolina. Among voters under 30, Della Volpe polling for won't pack down. It has Biden trailing Trump as of a month ago by a point. It now has Harris beating him by 9 points. And it has her approval with voters under 30 jumping 16 points since she got the nomination. Then there's the J.D. Vance poll. Blueprint, which bills itself as a Democratic pollster but centrist, polled on good old JV on July 21st and 22nd, the 2 days after Trump picked the weirdo. His net favorability then was 7 points underwater, but with exposure and the post-convention honeymoon and Trump's seal of ungodly approval, Vance should have improved, right? New numbers from last week, his net favorability has changed, as predicted here, from 7 points underwater to 11 points underwater. They polled on specific words and terms, too. Young, smart, businessman, sank. On the rise about J.D. Vance, anti-woman, weird, and extreme. Extreme about J.D. Vance is up by 13 points. The lead pollster, a man named Evan Roth Smith, said of the Vance data to Semaphore News, quote, "Everything has gone exactly as bad as Democrats had hoped and Republicans have feared." Is it lol or lol? 538 average is now Harris 46, Trump 43.3. Even the Real Clear Politics average of polls, which they spend an hour a day compiling and the other 23 hours a day trying to figure out how to make the Rasmussen poll seem not only legit but 10 times as important as anybody else's poll. Even the Real Clear Politics poll, the RCP, has Harris up by half a point. But just remember the rules. The polls are rigged unless they favor Trump. Just like you back the blue, except on January 6th. And you should carry the rallies live unless they're Kamala Harris rallies. And misspeaking is nothing to worry about unless it's by Joe Biden. And vagueness about military service should be covered endlessly unless it's Trump's draft dodging or Vance's work in the killing fields of press release management in Iraq. And insults, especially insults about furniture, are hilarious. Unless they're about J.D. Vance. And most important to remember, hacked emails, stolen emails are sacrosanct and cannot be published under any circumstances. Unless they're Hillary Clinton's, perhaps. It is kind of funny what has actually tripped up Trump here. The crazy post, not a charge, but an absolute statement of fact in which he assumed everybody agreed with him, that the images of Kamala Harris's airport crowd were AI, that really was some kind of tipping point for a lot of people who somehow or another now reveal they were holding out hope that Trump actually isn't or wasn't insane, that it was a marketing scheme or campaign strategy. People who believe that those of us who have been insisting he actually is insane were being hyperbolic for some reason. Oh, yeah, we know what you mean. You mean he's, quote, crazy, unquote. No, I mean he's crazy. Norm Eisen, Trump impeachment counsel, former Obama White House ethicist in residence. I never really thought about this before. There's one thing even more scary than the idea that Donald Trump was lying about winning in 2020 or about today's nutty claim. It's this, that he really believes it. Really, Norm? Never thought of that before. Trump's mental health crisis must be urgently covered by the media. Jesus H. Christ! What do you think I've been doing here? I started in 2016. I still had some dark hairs back then. Okay, all right, I'll stop. Whatever. Better late than never. Welcome, Norm. I mean, the right-wing troll Ian Miles Chong said Trump's nuts about the AI thing. Tom Nichols went over the line here. The ex-Congressman Joe Walsh. They now see it. I'm not alone. I'm not alone. This did not occur to them before, I guess. I mean, there aren't a lot of times in life where you have to pick the title of a book. The one I went with about Trump was, Trump is effing crazy. I didn't choose that because it marketed well. It doesn't market well. Christ. It's like the Chopper story. Sure, it was Willie Brown slamming Kamala Harris on a white-knuckled chopper flight with Trump in San Francisco in 2018. Oh, no, not Willie Brown. Jerry Brown. No, not Jerry Brown, the other politician. Nate Holden from San Francisco. No, he's from Los Angeles. And the flight wasn't in California, it was in Jersey. And no, it wasn't 2018, it was 1990. And none of them had ever heard of Kamala Harris in 1990. Oh, and Nate is like my height and Trump's height. And Willie is like 5'6" tall. Other than that, just another gold standard take it to the bank Trump stable genius recollection. I mean, do these things have anything in common? Probably not. Except if there is the proverbial run on the honesty bank where suddenly everything Trump does, flying in Epstein's plane over the weekend. Oh, wait, Epstein's been dead 5 years last week. Epstein probably has nothing to do with that plane now. Just saying. But there's that story. There's the Kamala Harris AI story, the Nate Holden 1990 story that became Willie Brown 2018. There becomes a moment where everything he does that nobody thought to make a big deal of, that nobody actually thought, maybe this guy's just crazy. They're now all looking for things to make a big deal about. In which case, oops. Just say oops and get out. Let me quote Burt Lancaster as J.J. Hunsaker in the dark classic The Sweet Smell of Success. You're dead, son. Get yourself buried. But not to worry. Trump hasn't crashed and burned. He's not out of control. He's not crashing in the polls. He's not responding to the disastrous consequences of his obsession with revenge by stepping on the pedal and being even more obsessed with revenge. And he's not dead and get yourself buried, and the media isn't suddenly looking for things to make big deals of. Oh, no, he's winning. Don't you see that? Look at all those polls. The Rasmussen poll. Those are they made ESPN and then sold it for $3. They're the geniuses. Everybody else is wrong. You'll see it'd be like 1948 with Harry True. Oh, he was a Democrat. Don't use 1948. No, we're winning. Don't you see that? We're winning like the Nazis were winning in 1945. At this point, writes Eric Erickson, Grew up so poor we could only afford the one name. The GOP has so devastated Tim Walz, I wouldn't be surprised to see Josh Shapiro show up at the DNC as their vice presidential pick, unquote. Which is such a wildly inaccurate and desperate thing to write. I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody else, one of those patented QAnon body doubles, show up at the DNC claiming to be the actual Eric Erickson. As if anybody knows who the F Eric Erickson is, or, what the F he looks like. No, he's winning. No, absolutely. Don't listen to the polls. They're all rigged. They're all rigged. Also of interest here, with the Olympics over, what percentage of the public now thinks that if it started right now, it could make the Olympic team? Would you believe the correct answer is about 25% of people think they could make the Olympic team? Well, and the death of news is usually slow and incremental. And don't you know what you got till it's gone? Except when it is sudden and traumatizing. The best all-news radio station in history is dead. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Postscripts to the news. Some headlines, some updates, some snark, some predictions. And today, the words postscripts and news are actually interlinked, and never more appropriately so, and never more sadly so. Dateline, New York. WCBS News Radio 880, formerly WCBS News Radio 88, 2 weeks shy of its 57th anniversary as the linchpin in the CBS News brand, the nerve center of its operation. WCBS News Radio is going off the air 2 weeks from yesterday. The home of Charles Osgood and Lou Adler and Jim Donnelly and Rita Sands and Ed Ingalls and Rich Lamb and Arth Athens and Irene Cornell and more recently Wayne Cabot and Paul Murnane and Tom Kaminsky and thousands of others of the best radio news broadcasters at the best radio news operation in history. They are all going off the air. The other all-news radio station in New York, WINS, WINS, will stay on the air. The two started to share reporters and some anchors 2 years ago, which was the first sign of the apocalypse. There are many people who prefer the WINS style, which dates back to their days as bloodthirsty rivals. WINS using the Westinghouse bulletin style, WCBS the more thorough style. I have been listening to them both since about 1970, and I have met in that time many of those people who have preferred WINS, and when I say many, I mean I have met two of them. This is what it sounded like when WCBS signed on August 28, 1967. From the beginning, the news happened there. Literally, that morning, August 28, 1967, the morning of the launch of all-news CBS Radio, a plane hit their tower. I swear.
This is News Radio 88 WCBS FM New York. Parachuting disaster on Lake Erie. As many as 5 feared killed as a light plane hits the WCBS radio tower. And a wave of terrorism in Vietnam. Good morning. This is Charles Osgood, News Radio 88. Boats and planes.
That newscast, anchored that morning by Charles Osgood, continues at this hour, and it will continue until 2 weeks from yesterday. It has been occasionally interrupted by sporting events and some paid for broadcasts on Sunday mornings. Other than that, they have been on the air since August 28, 1967. WCBS was on the air for 44 years before it went all news. Will be replaced at 880 on the AM dial by ESPN Radio in New York. And I say this in the following context. When the news director at WCBS told me when I was 20 years old that I would make it in broadcasting, I began to believe that I would make it in broadcasting. I want to tell that story in full in a moment. When I heard my own work on WCBS later the same year, I confirmed my own existence. When they had an opening for a sportscaster the next year at WCBS and they hired somebody else instead, although I was the runner-up, I could barely get out of bed for the next week. When I began to work on the sister station of WCBS, the one in Los Angeles, KNX News Radio, at age 26, I grew about an inch taller. I sometimes would mention KNX before I mentioned the TV station, of which I happened to be sports director and paid $500,000. And when ESPN bought a station in New York in 2001, the first person they approached to be the primary host for that station was me. I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement just to talk about it with them. So I've had a lot invested over the years in WCBS and WINS and ESPN Radio, and WINS outliving WCBS and WCBS to be replaced by ESPN Radio. It's like the war of Coke versus Pepsi finally ending and the winner turning out to be RC Cola. Diet RC Cola. They're all gone now, or they will be. WNEW, the unstoppable owner of the big band market here. WABC, the Beatles station. WOR, which ran live daily shows by Bob Elliott and Ray Goulding, and then one at night from Gene Shepard. They might as well have had Thurber working there, and now WCBS. No, you don't need two all-news radio stations in New York City. You didn't need them in L.A. I worked for both of them, and KFWB doesn't exist anymore either. You don't need them both, just like you don't need Coke and Pepsi, or you don't need AM and FM, or rock and roll. Yeah, that was the WCBS sounder. Twice an hour, 3 times an hour. Those notes mean news. Still ahead of us on this edition of Countdown, as I just referenced, a letter from the news director at WCBS, the late Lou Adler, sits framed on my wall, memorized, the way my dad used to keep his first architectural license above his drafting table. The letter and the future it promised was one thing, that I nearly got killed on the drive to Ithaca, New York, to read that letter after my friend's father had taken the snow tires off his son's car because it was April, and since when did it snow in April? That story is nearly as good. It's next in Things I Promised Not to Tell, along with the Lou Adler letter. First, there are still more new idiots to talk about, the daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world. The bronze, worse, Yusuf Dikets, the Turkish Olympic air pistol Olympic medalist. You've seen him. Everybody else wearing these extraordinary form-fitting outfits to shoot their little guns at the Olympics and wearing sights on their fingers and having one eye forcibly closed. And this guy, Yusuf Dikets, just sort of stood there and went, "Keep the target still," boom, and won a medal. Well, it's all his fault. YouGov did a survey, and it reports that 27% of British people now think that if they started to train today, they could make the 2028 British Olympic team. Isn't that special? 27% of everybody in the United Kingdom, including everybody who really can't get up to change channels to stop watching the Olympics now, they think they could make the team if they started doing it now. This is the fundamental problem with and the reason for the continuation of humanity. No, you're wrong. None of you have a chance of making the team, and you're going to try anyway, and one person will, and that will be enough for another 100 years of humanity. But listen to this. The 10-meter air rifle, the shooting competition, 15% of Britons think they can make that team. 13% think they could make the archery team. 10% believe they could make Olympic badminton. 9% believe they could play Olympic table tennis. 7% believe they could row on the Olympic rowing team. Have you ever tried rowing? I mean competitive rowing? Have you ever tried to be a member of a crew just at, say, the collegiate level? I went to one practice one day and went, 5 o'clock in the morning, are you out of your minds? 6% believe they can make the 100-meter sprint team. Yeah, what's your name? Usain Bolt McGillicuddy? Cycling. 6% believe they could make a cycling road race Olympic team. 100-meter breaststroke. 6% believe they could make the Olympic swimming team. 6% believe they could make the Olympic British trampoline team. 5% believe they could make the shot put. 5% believe they could win a spot on the British cycling team in track cycling. The sprints, they could go faster than everybody else. 5% believe they could make the equestrian team. 5% fencing. 5% Olympic golf. Well, this is universal. All golfers think they could make the Olympic team. 5% believe they could make Olympic volleyball. 4% believe they could make the British Olympic basketball team. 4% believe they could make the British Olympic soccer team, which is far crazier than the ones who think they could make the basketball team. 4% believe they could make the sailing team, the triathlon team. 4% believe they could make water polo. 3% believe they could make rhythmic gymnastics or artistic gymnastics. 3% believe they could make the diving team. So let's everybody go and stand by the pool to fish these people out of the water. You have to be able to swim? I didn't know that. 3% believe they could make the British Olympic rugby team, and 3% believe they could make the Olympic skateboarding team. I am flashed back to a day in 1984 when I was at Channel 5 in LA, and we were carrying the Olympics. And we got the spillover phone calls from viewers who didn't know what the hell they were watching, because it was a Wednesday afternoon and the soap operas weren't on. And they wanted to know what they were seeing. And one guy called in and said, "What is this sport you have on?" And I looked up at the monitor, and it was a soccer game. The guy had never seen soccer before. This is very interesting. How do you try out for this team? Well, you don't. Those are basically professionals. Oh, no, I could do that. I can run up and down a field like that. For 60 minutes? Sure, I could do it all day. Where are they playing this match? And I said, it's at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California. And the guy said, what part of Boston is that? Is it on the T? He was not making this up. But the one I don't understand is, I understand that the United Kingdom has not had a lot of success in international football recently, but 4% of people in Great Britain believe they could make the soccer team that would represent the UK in the 2020 Olympics if they started trying now. The key thing in all this is this includes all the people who will turn 49 4 years from now, or 39 4 years from now. And now 15% because of this one guy from Turkey think they can make the air rifle competition. Hold still! Hold still! You ever used a gun before? No! You're supposed to point the hole out towards the target. No kidding! No kidding, governor! The runner-up, the worser, Chris LaCivita. Trump simp. You will recall he was behind the swift boating of John Kerry during the 2004 campaign. He tweeted, or somebody else tweeted, a criticism of the lies of the 2004 swift boat campaign, which was designed to prove that John Kerry, during his service in Vietnam, when he won his medals, during everybody getting around him getting killed, didn't deserve any of those medals and therefore should be defeated for the presidency by George W. Stay-at-home, fly-a-plane in Texas Bush. Yes, Chris LaCivita was the guy in charge of that. Rick LaCivita was a CBS sports producer. Almost as big a jackass, but not quite. Chris LaCivita is now on, of course, the Trump campaign, basically the co-manager. He responded to this criticism by tweeting, "Swift boat veterans for truth were never disproven. Reply to that, yes, it was disproven. I was chief strategist for Bush-Cheney 2004, and this Swift boat attack was nearly all lies. That's from Matt Dowd. I believe Chris LaCivita was hoist on his own petard. Of course, LaCivita was hoist on his own petard into his own hell. The Trumpists have already landed on him and Pat Summerall's daughter Susie Wiles, as the reason Trump has already lost the election, even though it's November and we're just in August now. He's been attacked, this LaCivita has, by everybody from James Carville to Nick Fuentes. You have to feel sorry for No, you don't. F them. Speaking of which, the winner, a woman named Michelle Morrow. Why do we have to play this election like it will be decided by 1 point each in 50 different states? Because of the Michelle Morrows of this world. It's not just that Trump has to be beaten, his gang has to be metaphorically chased down like they were the Clantons, and this is Wyatt Earp Day. Who is Michelle Morrow? She is the Republican candidate to run the public schools in North Carolina, and she is 100% fascist, kill everybody else nuts. You think their 800-pound candidate for governor who thinks his opponent needs killing is a bad guy. This is Michelle Morrow, as CNN found on Facebook, and she recorded this on the night of January 6th, 2021. Oh, Michelle, it's your turn to be crazy.
President Trump is still president until the 20th. So he can still invoke the executive order against voter fraud. And now he has every player that participated in his sites, and they can all be arrested for treason. And if the police won't do it, and the Department of Justice won't do it, then he will have to enact the Insurrection Act, in which case the Insurrection Act completely puts the Constitution to the side and says, now the military rules all. Okay? And let me tell you, President Trump has the military on his side, because the military and many leaders in the military who love this nation and who love our Constitution and who have put their life on the line to protect the freedoms of people in the United States that they will never meet, they chose President Trump to be their candidate. So as long as he invokes the Insurrection Act before the inauguration, then he's going to be reinaugurated. He's going to be put back in.
As our grandfathers and great-grandfathers said during World War II, why we fight. Michelle Morrow, who thinks that the military should take over the government to make sure Trump becomes president again. And guess what? I'm thinking she hasn't repudiated that point of view. Maybe we could have just a little bit of an insurrection act by President Biden, just directed at her. We're going to invoke the Insurrection Act for the next 35 seconds while we lock her up, and she dies in prison too. Michelle, we lost that January 6th, but we're going to win the next one, in which the victims are your children. Morrow, Republican candidate to run public schools in North Carolina, and today's worst person in the world. This is the story, and it is a long one, of the Adler letter and the hell through which I had to go just to read it. The Adler letter, falling into my hands on the night of Sunday, April 8, 1979, was like the postscript to a breathless 500-page novel that turns out to be 1,000,000 times more exciting, more interesting, and more important than any of those 500 pages or the 500 pages combined. We had driven by that point around 9 or 10 hours. I do not believe I ever actually expected to die on the trip, but I was, at least a dozen times, absolutely convinced that George and I would wind up in the hospital. He and I were college seniors, gone home to see the defending two-time world champion New York Yankees open the 1979 baseball season, and then back on the road for the 4.5-hour trip from the parking garage at Yankee Stadium to the rural wilds of Ithaca, New York. We had done this countless times, but I did not know as I got out of my dad's car and later on into George's that this trip had two previously unimaginable components. First, at that hour, the Adler letter had already been sitting in my mailbox at my apartment at 207 Delaware Avenue, Ithaca, New York, for at least one day, maybe two. And I did not know the other thing and only found it out as George told me about it at the ball game. His father had yelled towards him as George backed out of the driveway that morning, "George, there's rain in the forecast. Drive carefully. Remember, I took off your snow tires because it's spring now." The midpoint of the trip to my school, Cornell, and his, Ithaca College, more or less, was a McDonald's restaurant in Liberty, New York. And we stopped there and got a late lunch or an early dinner, and I was sitting facing the window, and George was sitting facing the counter. And as we ate and mumbled, I said, "George, you have a really bad case of dandruff, or did it just start really snowing?" George wheeled around to look out the window. Uh-oh. We wrapped up our burgers and took them with us and literally ran to the car. "My father and his goddamn snow tire obsession," George shouted. Within an hour, on the outskirts of Binghamton, New York, 3 or 4 inches of snow had reduced speed to just above single digits and visibility to next to nothing. George was a meticulously good driver. Didn't matter. We spun out a full 360, loop-the-loop. We're going north. Oops, we're going west into oncoming traffic. Oops, we're going south into the cars behind us. Oops, we're going east into the ditch next to the highway. Hoo boy, we're going north again. I think we spun out 6 or 7 times on the highway alone before we got to Binghamton. There was some solace in seeing other cars in both directions doing exactly the same thing and concluding that George's father could not have had the time to remove all their snow tires, too. We were not far north of Binghamton, still skidding, still spinning, George swearing nonstop when he interrupted himself long enough to ask me what time it was. I had to hold my watch up to the car window to get brief flashes of illumination from the highway lights. A little after 7, we skidded again. George swore loudly. "Put the Ranger game on. I do it myself, but..." We skidded again. By now, I was getting kind of used to it. I turned the radio literally before George regained control of the steering. I found the Ranger station, the one in New York, WNEW. If you had told me that night that a little over a year later I would be broadcasting on WNEW, my first thought would have been, "So we don't get killed tonight? Because George's father took off the snow tires, that's nice. Oh, and I work there, and I'm not a ghost?" If you told me that night that the Adler letter was waiting for me back in my snow-covered mailbox in Ithaca, I might have pressed George to go faster. And they might never have even found our bodies. The storm, as storms often did in those long-gone days, somehow boosted the AM radio signal from New York. And though we were 200 miles away from the transmitter, Marv Albert and the WNEW Rangers broadcast was clear as a bell. The traction even seemed to get a little better. But we both knew the ordeal that lay ahead. The exit from the highway at Whitney Point. It amazed us, as it amazes the students there now, as it must have amazed the students who went there a century ago, a century and a half ago, that Cornell University, which I attended, and Ithaca College, which George attended, were both an hour's drive away from the nearest highway. There was, in fact, no access to Ithaca, New York, by anything more than a 2-lane road. It was legendary on the Cornell campus that old Ezra Cornell, the barely literate railroad tie preservative tycoon of the 19th century, decided to give away nearly all of his fortune, which today would have been at least $1 billion, and he told a friend he was going to open a university where anyone can study anything. His friend reacted in horror. "They will stampede the place." Ezra Cornell laughed. "Wait till you see where I put it." Ezra Cornell's little geographical joke was still vividly alive 110 odd years later. The easiest of the routes to his university was the one that took you from Ithaca to Whitney Point. Whitney Point, the capital of the Metroplex there, Whitney Point, Lisle, and Center Lisle, also known as the Calcutta of Broome County, where nearly 3,000 people live atop each other in conditions so crowded that every person barely has his own square mile. Once you got off at Whitney Point, you were at the mercies of Route 79, where if traffic were light or the drivers adroit, you might make it back to Ithaca in 30 minutes. But if you got stuck behind somebody, it could be an hour or two. Or if there was an April blizzard and George's father had taken off your snow tires, it could take you longer than it took Antarctic explorers to reach the South Pole, and you'd see more snow and ice than they did. I believe George and I skidded making the left turn off the highway, but he managed to stay on the road. The radio signal was not quite as fortunate. Within minutes of leaving the highway, WNEW began to compete for space on George's car radio with some audible noise that the radio could suddenly pick up from his turn signals. Make a right, and Marv Albert was being drowned out by a loud click, 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 as in, Vickers, cross the click, 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 pot van slashes, click, click, click. Within minutes, after the first spin out on Route 79, mercifully with literally no other cars on the road, the woo-woos arrived. We never figured out what they were, but they waxed and waned so slowly that at first I asked George why Ranger fans at Madison Square Garden were chanting woo-woo during the game. George was too busy swearing to answer. The snow was now horizontal, and as it danced towards us in George's headlights, it was hypnotic. And the Ranger broadcast now sounded like this. Vickers, Crossley, woo, 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 woo. Pot van slashes, click, 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 click. Damn it all to hell. Woo, woo, woo. Davidson holds with the save. Woo, woo. Son of a bitch. The trip from Whitney Point had taken well over an hour, and we were not halfway there yet when the inevitable happened. George kept a steady, slow pace, 10 or 15 miles an hour tops. He really was a great driver. He did not accelerate. He did not turn, yet all of a moment, his green 1970 Dodge Dart decided to make an abrupt left at about a 45-degree angle. We were off the road in seconds and headed for an unscheduled visit to the front porch of a farmer's house that had to have been set back at least 200 feet from the road. Here, finally, the heavy snow worked to our advantage. It slowed us. Then it stopped us just 2 or 3 feet before we would have plowed into this guy's house. However, since we were in Richford, New York, birthplace of John Rockefeller, by the way, or we were in Caroline or Caroline Center or Slaterville Springs or wherever the hell we were, the homeowner emerged bearing not a gun nor an attitude, but genuine concern. In fact, he heard the Ranger game on the radio and asked me the score, which is when I noticed that the moment we had left the road, the woo-woos had stopped, and the WNEW signal was as good as it must have been in Madison Square Garden in New York. The farmer helped us push the car back onto Route 79, and as we got in, he went and said, where are your snow tires? George started to swear again. I took over and explained about George's father. Never been up here, has he? George started the car back up and now drove even slower. Within a minute, the woo-woos were back. Marv Albert and Sal Messina, woo, 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 where the Rangers lead, woo, woo, woo. We got there, finally. George was actually going to try to drive up the hill that led to the other hill, that led to the Delaware Avenue Hill, where my apartment was. Calculating that I had pressed my luck sufficiently, I told him to just let me out at East State and Mitchell, and I'd make it from there on foot. Thankfully, George's father had not removed the sure grip soles from my winter boots. I actually went to my radio station first. It was literally a 2-minute walk from there to my apartment. I lingered at WVBR for 15 or 20 minutes and then hiked back. The Rangers had won their game. From the station, I had called George's apartment, and he had made it back there. And I took my first deep breath since the McDonald's in Liberty. And I reflected that it was only 6 hours until my next class, and guess what? I was going to cut. I stomped off the snow on my porch at 207 Delaware Avenue, and I opened the door, and I dumped my bag inside, and then I reached into the mailbox, and I saw it immediately. The return address, Adler, WCBS, CBS Radio, a division of CBS Inc., 51 West 52nd Street, New York, New York, 10019, 212-975-4321. Lou Adler was radio news in New York City in April 1979. And this was April 1979. I could barely breathe. The Adler letter. What was in the Adler letter, which explains why 5 decades later I know it by heart and can tell you exactly where it is at the moment. That's next. This is Countdown. Resuming the number one story on the Countdown and the several lifetimes contained on Sunday, April 8th, 1979. I survived a 9 or 10 or 800-hour drive in a blizzard right after my friend's dad had helpfully removed the snow tires from my friend's car. I had lived to resume my desperate bid to graduate college in 2 months and get a job somewhere in radio in 3 months, and against all odds, amid all the snow and mess, there was a letter waiting for me at my apartment in silent, snow-inundated Ithaca, New York, a letter from Lou Adler, the news director of the leading all-news station in the United States of America. Lou Adler had begun on WCBS the year I was born. In 1967, the station went all news, and it immediately became the best all-news station in the country. Lou Adler co-anchored the mornings, and 8 years earlier, he had become the station's news director. He was the best. His co-anchor, Jim Donnelly, was the best. His sportscaster, Ed Ingles, was the best. His reporters were the best. His weatherman was the best. His traffic guys were the best. His jingles were the best. I listened daily in high school and when I was home from college. I did not take literal notes, only mental ones. My college graduation, if I made it, was 7 weeks away. I had never worked on television in any form, but I had been on radio 2,000 or 3,000 times by then, and I thought I was pretty good at it. In the preceding months, I had flooded every radio station in every major market in the Northeast with a demo tape and a resume. I figured I might as well start in my home of New York and not eliminate a potential job, no matter how long a long shot it might have been. If I wasn't good enough to work there, I concluded, I should let the people who ran New York's radio stations decide that, since that's what they were paid to do. To this point, they had decided that by not responding. I got a few nibbles from some of the smaller stations, but as April 8th turned to April 9th, I had no job prospects. Other friends were getting offers in Waterbury, Connecticut, and Laconia, New Hampshire. The thought of which, and nothing against either of those cities, filled me with terror. And now, after this ordeal by snow and without snow tires, after the WNEW woo-woos and George's father's near fatal decision to remove those winter tires, here in my hand was a letter from the man who was, to my mind, the best radio newscaster I had ever heard. Obviously, it would be a rejection. But even in that moment, even at my age, 20 years, 2 months, and change, I was awestruck, not only that Lou Adler had replied, but that he alone, of all I had written to, he had been the one who replied. I believe I did not remove my parka before opening the envelope. I did put on one lamp in my apartment, and I read, WCBS, CBS Radio, a division of CBS Inc., 51 West 52nd Street, New York, New York, 10019 212 975 4321. April 3rd, 1979, Mr. Keith Olbermann, 207 Delaware Avenue, Ithaca, New York, 14850. Dear Mr. Olbermann, this will reply to your letter of March 27th, with which you included a tape of your sports work on WVBR-FM. Sometimes it's hard to know what a man can do by listening to a brief tape. I stopped. Wait, a man? Wait, which, oh, me! I'm just a kid. Sometimes it's hard to know what a man can do by listening to a brief tape, but I must tell you, I was excited by what I heard of yours. I think you have exceptional talent and poise considering your age and experience. You read well and you write well and you know how to use tape. If the short tape is truly representative of what you can do, and if your knowledge of sports is broad, and if you can perform under pressure well, then I feel you have an excellent future in this industry. By this point, my heart was beating so furiously I could hear it. I was this close to hearing it make the woo-woo sound. I think it might be a good idea for us to meet. Let me know when you can make it to New York. I have nothing here for you, and I know of nothing solid, but if I feel as strongly about your potential after we meet as I do now, a meeting certainly could do you no harm. Sincerely, Louis C. Adler, Director, News Operations and Programs, LCA/PP. George, I screamed into the phone, can we drive back to the city right now? He swore. I read George the letter. He paused. No, we shouldn't go tonight. You're not going to see him tomorrow. Wait till you get your appointment. But Jesus, this is like the manager of the Yankees asking you to stop by the stadium and bring your glove and bat just in case. I think I got to sleep at sunrise. I had read the Adler letter 20 or 30 times, and not until the 15th or so did I stop expecting it to have turned back into some courteous form letter rejection, badly Xeroxed and slightly off-center. Slowly, it dawned on me that my own assessment of my radio skills were not predicated on ego, or even the context of what else I could hear in Ithaca, which was then the 351st largest radio market in the country. Good, but still 351st. I cannot now describe the sense of validation, except to say that I half seriously considered not taking Lou Adler up on his offer to meet him at CBS World Headquarters, Black Rock itself, where Bill Paley would be working upstairs, because short of offering me a job, there really was no chance Mr. Adler could do or say anything more that could make me feel better or more confident that my dream of becoming a sportscaster would not lead me to starvation or to Laconia, New Hampshire. In fact, in person, Lou Adler found more things to say. If I had an opening for a sportscaster right now, I would seriously consider you for it. I would hesitate because of your age and your lack of practical experience, and then I'd probably do it anyway. He was as warm and supportive and informal as his letter had been structured and serious and tempered. Let me take you on a tour. We saw the live studios, the production studios, the writers' area. I wasn't just speechless. Again, I was breathless. And you should probably recognize this man by voice, if not by sight. Keith Olbermann, meet our sports director, Ed Ingles. Ed, this is Keith. This is the fellow with the tape. Ed Ingles took a moment, then his eyes widened. Hi, what a tape. Jesus, Lou, don't tell me you've hired him. Did you fire me? I must admit, I thought for a second it might have happened. I did not shrink entirely from that fantasy. Lou Adler laughed. No, Eddie. Then he paused. It was irresistible. Not yet. We went back to Lou Adler's office. Have you got any job prospects? I explained that a month earlier, thanks to a chain of recommendations that stretched from my internship at Channel 5 television the year before, through a young ABC sports executive named Bob Iger, I think it was, to a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, I had met everybody at the radio network of United Press International, and I was supposed to go back and see them about working there freelance as summer vacation relief for the year ahead in sports and in news. Oh, that would be ideal for you, Lou Adler said. It's a tough place to work. They don't pay well at UPI, but it's here in the city, and every other radio station in this country will hear you on the feed. That's where we hired Ed from, Ed Ingles. So if we have an opening, he smiled broadly, I can poach you and get you here in less than 2 weeks, can't I? Mr. Adler then suggested that the CBS station in Atlanta would be needing a sportscaster in a few months. I'll stay on top of that. They already have a copy of your tape. I hope you don't mind. I made several copies of your tape. If UPI does not work out, I am confident you will be offered a job in Atlanta and maybe quite a few other jobs. I hope I've been of some help. Stay in touch. It's one of the privileges of this job to be able to help. But frankly, you're not going to need that much help. I may have taken the train back to my folks' house, or I may have just walked the 20 miles or floated. The UPI job worked out full-time 2 months later. At the first game I covered for money, I walked into the press box at Shea Stadium, and there was Ed Ingles. Thank God you went to UPI. The way Adler went on about you, I seriously wondered if he was planning to bring you in and kick me out. The Atlanta offer Lou Adler arranged came. I turned it down. About a year later, I got a call from Adler's assistant saying they were going to need a new afternoon sportscaster at WCBS, and would I send a new tape? But by that fall, when the job opened, Lou Adler was leaving WCBS to become news director and vice president of another New York radio station, WOR. His successor would choose somebody else for the job, just as I heard from the people who ran the radio network that the WOR folks had started the year before. It was not coincidental. Lou Adler had sent these people starting this new network my tape. There is inevitably, from the distant future, a punchline. In 2006 or 2007, when Countdown had become the highest-rated cable news program that wasn't on Fox, an email appeared in my inbox. I could not believe the name of the sender. Lou Adler. He began just as formally as he had in 1979. He actually felt it was necessary to remind me about his letter. He said he watched every night, and when he found other viewers of the program, he told them the story. Proudly, he said. He asked if I remembered. I wrote back immediately, Remembered? Remembered? I told him I still had his letter, and I still had the sense of confidence it had given me, that it was central to my decision to more or less give up my sports career at the age of 38 and try news. And I told him the whole driving back to Ithaca and the snow tire story just for fun. Lou wrote back again within minutes. He had just retired after running the mass communications program at Quinnipiac College, and he said he'd had a strong sense of his career having been the proverbial punch into a pail of water. Now it was my turn to reassure him that the people like me whom he had supported and taught and broadcast to had long since begun to support and teach the next generation, and that generation was already supporting the one after that, and there would be people in this business beginning their careers after both of us were dead who would owe a debt of gratitude, whether or not they knew it, to Lou Adler, as I always will. Lou Adler died 5 years ago at the age of 88. There are letters and photos in the hallway that leads in from the front door of my home. They are from Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter, Joe Biden, and Lou Adler. And now WCBS will be off the air in 13 days. Might as well shut off CBS News. Well, from my point of view, this does 75% of that anyway. I've done all the damage I can do here, not as much as Odyssey has. Thank you for listening. Please share this pod with somebody who doesn't listen. Maybe we can pick up all the CBS listeners. We're up to a total audience of 1 million a week. Let's go. Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, the musical directors of Countdown, arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Chanel handling orchestration and keyboards, Mr. Ray on guitars, bass, and drums, and it was produced by TKO Brothers. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. My announcer today was, speaking of music, my friend Stevie Van Zandt. Everything else was pretty much my fault, although I tend on occasions like this to blame it all on Lou Adler. That's Countdown for this, the 85th day until the 2024 presidential election, the 1,314th day since convicted felon Dementia J. Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Use the September 18th sentencing hearing. Use the mental health system. You've got it, President Biden. Use presidential immunity to stop him from doing it again while we still can. And anti-Semitic, anti-immigration MAGA Republicans, please stop shooting at Trump. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. Bulletins as the news requires. Until the next one, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.